Hey, what's up, you guys? It's Porter Jack. I had a couple pairs of pants laying around the studio that I didn't really have any plans with, so I thought it would be a good idea to make some tote bags out of them. This is a really simple and easy project that really anybody can do with some pretty basic sewing knowledge, so without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go to Goodwill, Salvation Army, your mom's closet, your dad's closet, your closet, and get you a pair of pants that you want to turn into a bag. Now, you're going to want to shoot for a pair that's above a 30 and below a 34. You don't want to go over a 34, otherwise it's going to look all big and sloppy and looks like you're carrying around a beach bag. It just won't look good. So once you have found a pair that you think will look good, you can start measuring and cutting. Alright, so I'm just laying out my pants here and I'm measuring down approximately 20 inches. This is just a rough cut to kind of get some of that excess material out of the way. That way I don't have to seam rip so much. And then here I am seam ripping the inseam, and by doing so it allows me to open up the pants and get access to the crotch and the back seam. I'm not really sure if that's the proper terminology for those, but you get the idea. By seam ripping the crotch and the back seam, I'm able to move the panels closer together, and also I'm able to get the fabric to lay nice and flat. That way I'm able to stitch them down on top of each other. This is such a hack if you are an upcycler and you're tired of using tweezers to get all those little tiny threads out. This is just a Libman stiff bristle brush that you can get at Walmart, and it does such a good job at cleaning up your seams. I'm going to be making 4 tote bags in this video, so here I am just batch seam ripping these, getting them opened up, and getting them ready to pin and sew. Once you've got the bags seam ripped and opened up completely, you can go ahead and hit it with an iron. That way everything lays nice and flat and just goes together evenly. This is usually a step that I look past just because it takes extra time to do, but it always makes my projects so much neater and so much easier to work with. The crotch and the back seam are already going to have a fold from the flat felled seam, but as you can see here, I'm just folding over the inseam about, ½ inch and pressing that down with an iron. Now I'm just pinning the panels in place on top of each other. My little tip for this is to partially push all your pins in through first. That just holds the fabric in place, keeps it from moving around, and then I go back through and push the pins in the rest of the way, and that secures the fabric in place. Once you've got your bag, or in my case bags, pinned together, you can head over to the sewing machine and get to work sewing these puppies together. With all the upcycles I do, I like to retain as much of the original characteristics of the piece as possible. So even though the seam allowance isn't perfect and even on this pair of pants, I'm just following the original stitch line. That way it looks like nothing has been tampered with and it was made like this from factory. Okay, now that you got your crotch seams sewn completely flat on your pants, it's kind of going to look like a denim skirt at this point. Now, if you want a denim skirt and you want to end the project here, go ahead. But the next step in the process would be to flip it inside out and measure down approximately 16 inches. I've got a 16-inch MacBook Pro and it fits comfortably inside my bag with this length. I know it sounded like I probably had something else to say there at the end, but I didn't. Anyways, I'm just measuring down 16 inches from the top. You can go down as deep as you want. I feel like 16 is perfect. And then I got my cutting mat and ruler here, ensuring that the center is also 16 inches. Once you've made sure that your cut line is square so you don't end up with the bottom of your bag being slanted, you can go ahead and hack the bottom of this off, and then make sure to get rid of all this excess material here. It's unnecessary and just takes up space. There's 2 different ways you can finish the bottom of this bag. You can either sew a ½ inch seam allowance along the bottom, and that'll give you a more flat, kind of pointy looking bag. But if you want a more professional looking bag with a little bit more room, all you got to do is draw 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch squares like I'm doing here, cut them out, and then I'll show you what to do with it over at the sewing machine. Over on the sewing machine, you're gonna sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance along the bottom of the bag. If you decided not to cut the little 1.5 inch squares out, you can just run that seam along the entirety of the bottom of the bag and then skip this next part. But if you're following me, what you're gonna wanna do is match up the bottom seam that you just sewed and the side seam together, lay over the excess material like I'm doing here, and then run another 1/2 inch seam allowance along the corner of the bag. It's always a good practice to clean up your loose threads and unnecessary material as you work. It just always results in a cleaner product, and that way you don't have to do it all at the end. Also, if you happen to have a serger, now would be a great time to serge all of your raw edges, because at this point we're pretty well done working on the inside of the bag. Now that you've got your bag all sewn up and it's looking more like a bag than it is a skirt, you can move on to doing the straps. There's 2 ways you can go about doing the straps. You can either go back to Goodwill and get 2 more pairs of pants that match the kind of wash you're working with. Now, that's really easy to do when you're working with blue denim, but in my case, I've got this green denim and I've also got this black kind of corduroy looking material. I don't even know what it is. That would look really weird if I put a black denim waistband on it. So I'm going to show you how to harvest the waistband from some pants and use those as straps. And I'm also going to show you how to take the excess material from the pants you're working with and make straps out of that. If you're harvesting the waistband from another pair of pants, it's pretty straightforward. I've just got a razor blade here and I'm cutting off all of the little belt loops. And then the waistband is just one single stitch that's easy to take off. When I'm removing a waistband from a pair of pants, I usually just cut the button and the buttonhole off. I've just found that they're very unnecessary, they're hard to seam rip off, and I just haven't been able to find a use for them. I did, however, leave the Levi's patch on the waistband. I've got an idea of how I can incorporate that into the finished product that I think will look really cool. Once you've got both of your waistbands off of the pants and ready to go, make sure to clean up all those excess threads. And once they were nice and clean, I laid them side by side and I cut them at 33.5 inches. I found that this length is perfect for me and most other people. But let's say you want something like a shoulder bag, you can always cut the straps shorter. Honestly, you can do whatever you want here, but this is just what works for me. What I'm doing here is I'm just folding over those raw edges about 1/2 inch. If you have one of those white residential sewing machines, you're probably going to want to skip this part because it's just going to struggle trying to get through all those layers of denim. If you're going to be harvesting the fabric from the pants you're working with and making straps out of that, then I would just grab the legs that you cut off, get them seam ripped open and iron them nice and flat. That way they're easy to work with. And throw them on your cutting mat, and I cut them at 4 inches wide. This is what most of your waistbands are, and that is including the seam allowance. We're going to be doing kind of like a patchwork waistband, so just cut as many strips out of the fabric as you can at 4 inches wide. Over on the sewing machine, I laid out my pieces and I matched the right sides of the fabric together and then sewed a 1/2 inch seam allowance along the edge there. And then I just took all of my pieces and sewed them together until it was one big long chain. Once I got all the straps sewn together, I'll take it back over to the table and press all of those seams down nice and flat. And then I'm also cutting these at 33.5 inches long. I didn't feel like moving the camera, but I just went over to the sewing machine and I sewed 2 little stitches down the fold. Because this is the strap, it's gonna be load bearing. It's gonna be holding some weight, so it needs to be strong. So that's what I just did right there. It's a little bit dirty, but you get the gist. Beautiful. At this point, I'm pretty well ready to start turning this into a waistband. So I'm just folding over those edges approximately 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. And then I'm taking it and folding it completely in half and pressing that down nice and flat. Now that I got my straps all folded over and ready to go, I'm over at the sewing machine and I'm sewing these pieces together right on the edge. If you're looking for a seam allowance, I would say it's approximately 1/8 of an inch. But I'm sewing around all 4 sides just to really secure this fabric in place and keep it from stretching when you've got a lot of stuff in your bag. Okay, we're on the home stretch here. We're almost done with this bag. For the straps, there's not really a right or wrong way to do this. I kind of just laid out the bag and positioned the straps to wherever they looked the best in relation to the size of the bag. All of the bags that I made in this video had different waist sizes, so I kind of just played around with it for each one. And then I put a pin in the strap, flipped it over, and I did the same thing on the other side. Once I got my straps all pinned in place, I can head over to the sewing machine for the very last time and sew these straps on using what is commonly referred to as a box X stitch. This pattern is commonly used in a lot of garments and bags where you're joining 2 fabrics together and a lot of strength is needed. I'm sure you've seen it before, but if not, it looks something like this. And there you have it. That is how I turned a pair of jeans into a tote bag. If you've enjoyed watching the process of how I made these bags, or you feel like you've learned something in some way, I would really appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button, but honestly, if you didn't, don't worry about it. I always like to see who makes it to the end of my videos, so if you made it this far, make sure to comment tote bag in the comments below. That way I know you watched it all the way to the end. Alright, enough of the chit chat, let's roll the montage.